To apply materials to these, so at the moment they're in their kind of native color, how they come in as an object. And I've just gone to camera view here. If I hit M, it opens up the Slate material editor. And in the left here, there's all these standard materials that are packaged with the 3ds Studio Max software. We've got some really old ones that from early releases of 3ds Studio Max, some fairly recent ones that work specifically with the mental ray renderer. There's a whole heap of maps and controllers, and all of these things you can open with the little plus and the minus, but I'd leave those closed because they're more used to customize your own materials when you get a little bit better at this. And then there's a really powerful new library of ceramics, concretes, and photorealistic materials that you can apply to a scene. When you get a little bit better at the software, these things really come into their own. Within finishes though, so what I want to do at the moment when I'm rendering it, I've got all these kind of colors. I've got a black background. The background or the environment changes when we apply lights eventually. But at the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint everything white. It's always a good habit to get into, so I'm just going to toggle M on again. And I could just drag one of these stand materials in, which is kind of a grey, but there's a really nice, under finishes, there's a really nice material called wax satin or wax varnish that I'll apply to everything. So I'll use that as my example material. So if I want to activate a material, I grab it here and I drag it over to this middle palette, which is my view palette. And it brings in this icon with a series of parameters that are associated with the material that you've selected. And just to go up, I'll drag in a standard material as well, just a standard architectural material. You can see that it stacks them up in this environment, and we can neaten up the layout of all these by hitting these little buttons here. And what I'll do is I'll just make these little sample slots big, so I can double click that here and make that image big. Now what it does, these little sample slots, it'll show what the color will turn out as, how the shadows and the fall off the shadows will turn out when I apply them to the scene, and the level of gloss. And all of these parameters I can change. So if I double click the icon or the heading of it, I can actually change the color of it, the material. So I could change it to a green wax, but I'm going to go for something that's kind of white with a full saturation that's white, just a little bit off, I guess, in value. You don't want a full 100% white. It becomes a little bit difficult to use eventually. And you can change things like reflectivity, and you can actually make the object transparent as well, so that's always good for glass. You know, if we go down to this other type of material here and I double click that, it's got its own series of parameters. There's a whole heap of templates that are associated with materials types or properties, and their associated shininess, transparency, translucency, colors. And there's the option of actually putting a two-dimensional raster image in and mapping it over a material, and that's how you'll find that you'll apply, say, a brick finish to a wall within this environment. If we go down, I'll just show you an example here. Let's say we go with masonry, go to brick, I'll just drag the common bond in. If I double click that, it's a bit hard to see on your screens, but if you zoom in, there's actually a series of mortar joints and textures of the brick, and those images are fed in from a bitmap that's been saved somewhere else. Alright, so we're not going to use those today, but just know that they are there, and you've got to have a really thorough understanding of how to use them before you apply them, I think. And stay abstract, you know, stay abstract. That's what I'd recommend. So now how to apply these to the scene. I'm just going to hide this for a second. What we need to do is we need to select all the objects that we want to paint in a particular color. So for this purpose, I'll just do it as select by name. and I'll choose all of the geometry, like so. So I've got it all selected. I hit M again and it opens up my material editor. I choose my wax finish, and there's a little button here called Assign Material to Selection. I can also grab this little dot on the right hand side of the material and drag it out to the scene if I want to paint things individually. But the best way is just to make sure that's highlighted so it's kind of a dark blue, and then use this little Assign to Material to Selection button in the top. Now I'll minimize that, and I'll turn off my edged faces mode, like so, and you'll see that now it comes up as kind of a white, everything's been painted with the material color. Okay, so if I go through and render it, you'll see what happens. So let's say you wanted to have some of these objects as red. I'm still going to use my wax because I'm quite fond of that. Just go to Define It. And this is a Satin Finished Wax. I'll double click on this one, so you can have as many of these in the scene as you want. And I'm just going to change the color to maybe a kind of a dark red. Alright. And I can change the reflectivity, so I can make it really shiny. Eventually when I put lights in, that's what it'll start to do. I'll drag this over to the side. I've got this selected, and let's paint the inside of the cylinder red. So you'll see there that we've got all of these pieces, the underlying geometry, and I'll hit Alt Q so you can have a look at it, is actually painted red. And then the frame that I created with the lattice tool is still painted in that white wax finish. Okay, let's just do another one just to review again. We'll try the varnish finish this time. You can see that it's a little bit more glossy in wax. I'm going to grab this. I might just change the size of those pieces of lattice and double click it in the title bar, and I'll change the color to a kind of a light blue. Alright, so I'm doing these things a little bit arbitrarily. You've got to have a little bit more direction when you do it than what I'm showing you, but I think it's the easiest way for me to show you the potentials of the software, I guess. Now I'm just going to paint this here blue.